So welcome to Grief and Grace, Navigating Pregnancy, Loss and Grief During the Holiday Season. My name is Sophie and I'm going to just start off the session by doing a brief welcome and some housekeeping just whilst everybody continues to join. I know that this is a little bit of a tricky time at night for everyone, so we'll just give people a few moments to run through. So first of all, before I go any further at all, I just want to acknowledge the lands on which we're meeting this evening. So as we gather online from many different places around Australia, we acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands in which we call home. We pay our respects to elders past, present, and honour the strength, resilience and wisdom of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. So welcome. We are talking pregnancy, loss and grief in the holiday season or the Christmas period. So thank you for joining us. We're going to just, again, building on the acknowledgement of country, take just a moment to honour all the babies that we have lost in this virtual room. Those that were deeply loved, longed for and held in our hearts, even if not in our arms. We acknowledge the grief that follows in all its forms and the way it continues to shape lives long after the moment of loss. We also hold close the babies who are still yet to greet us earthside, and the hopes and dreams and quiet courage carried by those of us in the room. Tonight we're going to come together with compassion, understanding and respect for every story that's shared in this space. Give me just a moment, sorry. So thank you for allowing me to share that. We are going to be obviously talking about loss, that's why you're here, but please take a moment to be very kind to yourself, and we're going to give lots of little prompts for that throughout the evening session. We're anticipating that the session is going to go for between 40 minutes and an hour, depending on, we've got quite a few questions that have come through, but depending on how the session is tracking, but we've allowed an hour. So just a reminder, we have turned off videos and audio at the moment because we are recording this session in hope that those who couldn't attend tonight will be able to attend and be able to watch the recording, and hope that that will help them in some way. So if you have any questions, comments or concerns, pop them in the chat. I'm going to be monitoring that while Kat and Stacey take us through the session. Remembering that we are trauma-informed professionals, health professionals. So if you jump off at all, we're not going to mind. So also you can just pop yourself on mute, well, not mute, pop your screen down and just walk away for a moment if you need to take a break, have a drink of water, etc. So we're here to provide you with space with other women and partners, family members with a shared experience. We know that the holiday period can be challenging. And we aim to support you tonight to navigate your grief and pregnancy loss, if that's your case, throughout the weeks to come, and provide you with some tools to help make this time just a little bit easier and gentler for you. So that's really enough talking from me, but I am Sophie. I am the Service Delivery Manager here at Pink Elephants. I also have lived experience of recurrent pregnancy loss and a background in public health. I've spent a lot of my career to date helping communities access services for their wellbeing, and I have a research background in this area. I'm just going to introduce Stacey and Katrina, and then I promise you I'll hand over to them. So we've got Stacey June Lewis with us. She's a registered counsellor and psychotherapist who specialises in women's health. She has a particular focus on grief around pregnancy loss and infertility, having lived through 8 losses herself. She is Pink Elephant's bereavement counsellor and podcast host, and currently facilitates support groups across Australia. Stacey has also recently become the founder of the Well Hub, an allied health and studio-based wellness centre in Melbourne's Inner West, where she also has a private practice. She brings a unique blend of clinical training, lived experience, and a rich background in media and broadcasting. And we have Katrina. So, Katrina Shaw is a counsellor, public speaker, and founder of Grief Talks. Her passion and advocacy as a grief specialist, in particular, is shaped by much of her own life with the death of her mum as a teen and more recently navigating infertility, recurrent miscarriage, and motherhood. She gently blends storytelling and evidence-informed strategies to ensure audiences leave with tangible and effective tools for their own belt. Katrina's work spans from children to business leaders, creating spaces of connection, vulnerability, and practical support. So welcome, Katrina and Stacey. So to begin with, whilst I just let a few more people in the waiting room, could you share with us what this time of year can look like for people navigating pregnancy loss or grief? So I'll open that up to either one of you who would like to start.
I'll let Stacey go first. You kick it off.
Oh, thank you, Soph. And hi, everybody. I was saying actually before the chat that it continues to be such an honor to hold space and show up for you all. I'm kind of imagining this is not the place that you would be choosing if you had a choice to be anywhere. And I acknowledge that. But I, in turn, still continue to be just very inspired by the fact that you're showing up and really trying to find ways to manage through what I'm sure is a bit of a shitty time. And so at this time in particular, and all times, we can experience so many feelings at once. I think if you have started to navigate this experience, it might be something that you've been going through for a longer period of time. You will know pretty quickly that many different feelings can coexist. And this time of year certainly does not discriminate. In fact, it can add other layers of guilt and kind of pressure of needing to feel something or maybe even feeling guilty about parts of joy. So there's just a whole heap of extra elements that are brought into an experience that already gives us a bit of a cluster and a concoction of
Mm.
so many different things. It is really common to feel a mix of sadness, anger, guilt, numbness even. And then sometimes you might have a moment where you quite like Christmas, or there's a festive situation that makes you laugh, and you can feel guilty about that too because you are also in the thick of grieving. So there is nothing really simple about this season. And I think it is really important to just give yourself a bit of a break when it comes to this, I guess, the analysis of what it can look like to experience pregnancy loss at this time, whether it has been recent or it's bringing up things for you. I wanted to add as well that I think it can really also amplify this identity grief. And I'll talk a little bit about this through the session, but I think it also needs to be said that we are grieving in many different ways, grieving the baby or babies that we haven't met. And we also can be grieving elements and parts of ourselves. And I think that can be a bit of a complex and maybe even a surprised idea, because we come into this big grief around the pregnancy loss, but then you can find surprise in, oh my goodness, I'm so sad that I'm not the person I thought I was going to be in this season. I
Mm.
imagined I might have had a pregnant belly, or I imagined I might have had a new baby, and that isn't just necessarily just about the baby. Now we're finding grief in who we are, in what we're feeling, in what we thought we would look like, in where our lives would be. And then often a lot of our environment and the people that love us are also grieving that picture
Mm.
that we can create. So, yeah, I think it is complex. I think there is a lot of things going on, and I think they're the two things that I wanted to kind of open up with, to just identify and really yeah, acknowledge at this time of year that I've experienced myself, and that I observe anecdotally in our therapy groups and in private practice for sure.
Thank you, Stacey. Thanks for the context and giving us a hint into what we're going to be talking about tonight, as well as validating all of the emotions that we could be feeling at this point in time. Kat, have you got anything you'd like to add to this?
Stacey covered it pretty extensively, I think, and I suppose the only thing that I'd add, which we'll talk about again, is that preemptive anxiety around questions and announcements and what is it going to feel like? Sometimes the lead up and the anticipation of the event itself can feel heavier
Mm.
than the event itself. So there's also sometimes a bit of anxiety around that. And yeah, as Stacey said, we'll touch on all of these things as we go throughout. But I think, yeah, she covered it pretty well.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, um, I guess building on that, why can the holiday season in particular um, feel grief heavier or harder or more complicated, Kat?
Mm. What we tend to find around the holiday season is that it's quite a high dose, like trigger environment. So there's a lot of things happening. There's like rituals and family gatherings and photos and even things like scents and music that can trigger this grief and these
Mm.
memories and these thoughts. And it's not necessarily the holiday or the day itself, but more like the concentration of reminders all happening at once. Um, when we get to the end of the year, we all know that we can feel very tired, we're run down, everything's busy, busy, busy. And what that means is that something called our window of tolerance can be a lot lower. So we all have our own window of tolerance, and this is our ability to cope with stresses in our life and to come back to regulation.
Mm.
And when we have a lot of stresses, we fall outside of this window and we tend to go into, our fight, flight, or freeze responses where our grief comes up. So our window is already small because we're all tired and we're all rushing. But then on top of that, when you add all of these grief triggers that we're experiencing, we're more or less likely to be able to cope with them and be
Mm.
able to call upon our strategies that would normally help in that time. And so we might have stronger reactions and stronger emotional reactions. Um, it can also be that it highlights this discrepancy between what we wish it looked like and what it actually looks like. So a bit like what Stacey mentioned, the grieving of ourselves, grieving of expectations. There's this big thing around like Christmas and the new year and what we're going to achieve in the new year and people celebrating all over social media and in our lives, these big things. And sometimes that can make us it highlight these things that we're still longing for and the things that we miss, which again, just amplifies our grief. So I find that tends to be, it's not necessarily the holiday itself, but all of the things that come with the holiday.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks, Kate. So yeah, like you said, it's already such can be such a chaotic time where we're already feeling a little bit burnt out, and then having those triggers that may bring things up for us that we may or may not be expecting. Um, so Stacey, what are some of the common emotions or experiences you hear about for individuals or couples during this time in your private practice or in
Yeah,
general? Mm.
yeah, I think this time in particular really does, because of the exhaustion, sadness can sometimes be a little easier to access. And when I say that, I'm not suggesting that if you have access sadness as an acute, way of moving through this, that there is anything uncommon about that. But sometimes there can be anger, a bit of a numbness, some shock that moves through acute situations if it has just happened recently. Or sometimes we go into, we talk about this in our Grief and Grace program, this dual processing model, where we are really leaning into one spectrum, which is that emotional and kind of deeply felt experience of grief, and the other, which is more of a restoration, which is still a version of grief. It just means we might move more into the parts of our life that keep our life moving. So work, social interactions. And when we are exhausted, and we might be moving into a lot of the restoration, so a lot of the kind of masking or the busyness,
Mm.
it means that the exhaustion can end up becoming a very big, I guess, sadness in quite a big way. So you might feel much more emotional, surprisingly. You might be driving in the car and hear a Christmas song, and it's just, and you're not a person that generally shows up crying that way. It
Mm.
can start to really move through you in a different way because of this time. Equally, we can also find a lot of anger, which I think is an emotion we don't talk about enough and we don't give
Mm.
enough permission for. So, anger about what the year ahead could look like, what didn't happen this year, because this year is, we get to this end, which is this kind of man made calendar year, but we do live on this calendar year where we start to reflect. okay, well, what happened this year? What did I achieve? What didn't I? And then what can I put forward next year?
Mm,
If you have been trying or you did lose a baby this year, the idea that you now want it and don't have much control over a lot of the elements of this experience can be quite infuriating if you're a person that likes to move into a bit more of a conscious process with what you want to achieve. So
mm,
there's a lot of elements that can be extra like extra turned up at this time. So obviously
mm,
sadness and anger and those kind of this disenfranchised, this numbness, this lost kind of sensation, this shock is very reasonable to feel across the board. But this time of year, that sadness and I think that anger and that kind of frustration and agitation off the back of what Kat said can come from the exhaustion, but also can come from this intense period of reflection.
mm.
So I think those emotions are what I do really hone in on and try and give clients and our groups permission
Yeah.
to feel and give themselves and yourselves, if you're watching,
Mm,
permission to
mm.
feel.
And that exhaustion from just the day to day, but the exhaustion from grief as well, especially
Totally.
if it's happened this year. Yeah.
Totally. And that it's inconvenient. You know, we want to be happy, we want to be
Yeah.
celebrating. We want to be having a champagne, not thinking if this is going to contribute to the next fertility run we're doing, or
Hmm.
if you need to have surgery because you're still going through your physical loss. You know, we don't want to be
Mm,
going through this. So there's some, some real natural emotions that need to be allowed to be felt, and to be given a safe space to be acknowledged and experienced.
mm. Thanks, Stacey. Katrina, we were talking when we were planning this session a little bit on like the flip side, and I'm just wondering if you can talk to that. We did touch on it already, but the ability that sort of two emotions or many emotions can be present all at once.
Mm.
Um, and as Stacey just said, we want to be able to celebrate, but sometimes we can't. But actually, sometimes there are little glimmers that can come through.
Mm.
And Kat, I'm just wondering if you could talk to the concept that we were talking about around, two emotions being present at once around
Yeah.
grief. Mm,
And it's something that I come across a lot just in the grief space in general is this idea that if people see me smile, they think that I'm not grieving anymore. But a multitude, not just two, but a multitude of emotions and realities can exist at the same time. And so there's pressure sometimes even to look and feel a certain way in terms of like look and feel sad and look and feel angry because we think that our friends and our family will only acknowledge our loss if that's how we express ourselves too. And I know that's something that personally I grappled with was I love Christmas. I am one of those crazy people that put my tree up, November
you know
time.
what, Kat? I can tell.
Um, and for me, when I had experienced my miscarriages, I didn't want people to think that I still wasn't sad and I wasn't grieving, and I still didn't want them to ask me those awkward questions. I didn't want that, but I also wanted to enjoy the time without this like presumption that everything's okay again. And so sometimes that can be this like really hard battle, internal battle, and thinking like we have to feel either or, but we can actually
Mm,
let them coexist in many, many ways.
thank you. I think that's yeah, reflecting back on my experience, I found that really hard. I'm also a Christmas person, and Christmas is really big in my family. And I remember thinking, like, I want to enjoy this, but I'm also just afraid of how what they're going to ask me. What are they going to ask me? So we're going to get into that in a moment. And so this builds on it perfectly, my sort of next question that I planned, but many people do feel the pressure to feel festive as well, even when they're hurting. And I guess navigating those conversations of what is going to be asked of me by my family, my friends, my work colleagues at the Christmas party, who may not fully understand, or even if they try to understand, but you don't really want to talk about it, or maybe you do want to talk about it. How can we on the call navigate that? You can open that up to either Stacey or Katrina.
Um, One thing I'm a big advocate for is that autonomy piece. And
Mhm.
so to have autonomy, I think one really big step is the clear, gentle boundary setting, which takes practice sometimes. It's not always easy to do, it's not always comfortable to do. But as I mentioned at the start, this anticipatory anxiety around what am I going to say? What if they ask me this? What if I decide I don't want to go? How do I cancel plans? How do I step back? And so I like to recommend that people do a couple of things. So preemptively set boundaries, tell key people ahead of time what you feel able and not able to do, that actually you might come, but at the last minute you might cancel, let them know ahead of time so you don't feel guilty for, explaining at the last minute. Um, Scripts, not apologies. You do not need to apologize for not wanting to be somewhere or not wanting to feel a certain emotion. You can say it's simple. It can be a whole sentence of, I am doing what my nervous system needs today. I'm doing what my grief needs in this moment. Um, we don't need to provide like a 14-page dissertation on, our emotional state and, what's happened to us. Of course, if we have people that we trust and feel able to share that with, we can, but
Mhm.
nobody, we're not obligated to do that. And so, no is also a complete sentence. Um, you can use selective disclosure. And that's also when people ask you questions. If people ask you directly questions, you can choose to say, I don't want to talk about that today.
Mm.
That's something I don't want to, I'm not, comfortable sharing right now.
Mm.
Um, they don't need the explanation. And then sometimes you might get like awkward comments about, like you should enjoy Christmas, or people even asking you if you're pregnant. Like, I don't know why people ask this question, and it seems to be more um happens more around the holiday season. But I think if people are sort of, trying to force you to be happy or force you to join in on the drinks, you can say, like, joy is complicated for me right now. I'm keeping things
Mm.
simple
That's a
this
good
year.
one. Toy is complicated
Um,
for me right
so
now.
I think it's,
Mm.
yeah, it's all around this clear boundary setting and having the autonomy to choose who and what you do. And try so it sort of removes that anxiety on the lead up. Do you have
Mm.
anything else, Stacey, would you say?
Yeah, I'd hone in even a little more specifically. I think I often say with our Grief and Grace group that if you're ever going to tell a white lie, it's now. Like, you don't
Yeah.
have to present everything to everybody. I think at this time of year, we also find ourselves mingling with people we don't aren't necessarily in our safe space. So,
Mm.
Auntie Carol might be have the best intentions when she's had a wine and she's a good time, but she's probably, not always the most let's say, open minded with the way that, I don't know, fertility or parenthood looks now. So there's all these
Mm.
sweeping statements that come through from someone who had 6 kids with no worries. Like, so it's just remembering that you will also be in circles of people that might not be educated and not interested in being educated, and you don't owe them
Mm,
the education piece. I think we often, people that move through this space and experience this can find a couple of things. We can often get very motivated to help this particular experience. We want to bring awareness, or we want to be able to articulate our feelings to teach people, but you don't always have to do that too. There is a time and a space for you to move in to advocacy for yourself and for others. And it is
Mm.
a very admirable and amazing thing if that is a place that you find yourself after something really shitty, but you don't have to, and you don't have to now. So I would say, yeah, there's an element here where you also can hold back. Another tool that we use in Grief and Grace is to start to identify your feelings. That is going to be the absolute step one, because you can't often make decisions or figure out what's right for you if you don't know what you're feeling. So, starting to navigate a bit of a routine, or at least some kind of practice of going, okay, all right, what is it that I feel in this moment? And it may be different to the hour before. It may have been different yesterday. We know this experience is a roller coaster, so it's going to look different a lot of the time, day to day, maybe hour
Mm.
to hour. And coming up with that, and then giving yourself a number. So maybe it could be 10 being you the best you've ever felt, 0 being the worst, and you respond with the number instead of all the context. So I'm at about a 3. It's not been a great day. I've changed my mind. So the number works as a demonstration. You keep the integrity of, and integrity is a funny word when I've just said to do a white lie, but you, if that's important to you, you keep that honest response. Uh,
Mm.
and you don't have to go into a full explanation. I think that number scale can sometimes give people enough information to be
I
able to.
love that, Stacey. I think that's great. And I think for those of you who have a support person with you, whether that be your partner or a friend, um, I don't know, Stacey, whether you think that would be even sharing that. I think there's a couple of couples on the call tonight being like, have a scale and speak the same language between the two of you, because obviously you're both going to feel, you're going to both have feelings at different times. So, today I'm feeling at a 3 or I'm feeling at a 6. Actually, as the day's gone on, I actually feel like a 2, and can we just not do that? Or,
And Brene Brown uses it in her relationship
mm,
in the context of coming together as a team. So as a team, you make 100. So say you want to go to a family do
mm,
and your partner is at 70 and you're at 30, well, you've got 100 between you.
yes,
Also find
perfect. Yeah.
ways to communicate if you have different communication styles,
Mm,
especially if you're a person that finds it hard to identify and communicate emotion.
mm.
But also, if you want to work as a team, you might try and find, that bandwidth together.
Mm.
Sure, fantastic. We're actually getting a few questions coming through, so I might actually, they're kind of building on what we're talking about now, so I might actually bring them into the discussion now. So, we've got someone who's asking, how do we deal with the guilt of asking for help? I'm supposed to host an event, and as it comes closer, I don't feel up to it, but I feel so bad asking for help when I know, sorry, for help to know, but I feel so bad asking for help when I know I don't know who will take over and everyone else is going through a lot. I still want to attend, but I don't want people in my space and my home right now. It's
Mm.
a very valid feeling.
Yeah, I
Do either
think
of you want to take that?
Yeah, I think it doesn't have to be black and white. So I think there's
Mm,
ways for you to find what your boundary is. So, okay, I can hear and I'm observing what you're saying is that there's a real kind of line there. But maybe
mm,
it looks like, but I'm still happy to contribute I'm still happy to bring the food, or I'm still happy because sometimes we still want to feel like ourselves. We still do want to be involved. So I think if it is a hard, I've got nothing left, then, that's okay. But I think often we can put pressure on, we either do something or we don't. It's either this, I either host everything and do everything or nothing.
mm,
Would you ask yourself, all right, well, what do I have capacity to offer and what is my line where I don't? Instead of seeing it as a black and white switch on, switch off, because I think sometimes that can add pressure to these decisions. And it may be a little more simpler if we can kind of piece it out a little.
yeah, I think that's a really good suggestion, Stacey. Just sort of break it down, still be involved if you feel up to it, and break it into smaller chunks. I might just move on to the next question. I hope we answered that question for you, Jenna. Any tips on supporting our own oh, sorry, I'll start that again. Any tips on supporting our own well-being while other family members may be introducing a new baby to the family at Christmas? There's a couple of people who've liked that. Um,
I had this experience, and for me, it came to that communication and letting them know that again, things can coexist. I'm really, really happy for you. It brings up a lot for me. It makes me feel, you know, I've upset, you're allowed to have coexisting emotions and letting them know that regardless of how you may present, that doesn't mean you're not happy for them. Um, Having those, I think doing all the things that we've kind of suggested in terms of the timeouts, words, the shared communication with the people that you're with. It's also okay if you do not want to attend. Again, there's a lot of pressure around the holiday season that we have to attend certain events. If for you it feels better to wait a little bit longer, you're allowed to wait a little bit longer. just because it's the festive season doesn't mean that we have to attend things that we don't want to attend. So, you know, removing this idea that yeah, we have to show up and be joyful and happy for them. And if you feel able to, and if they're your family and friend, I'd hope that you'd be able to have that conversation where you can at the very least say, I've got multiple emotions existing at once right now. This is what I would feel comfortable with. For me, I didn't feel comfortable being around all of the, I didn't want to hold the baby. I didn't want to, be around all of the excitement with their family. So I said, I'm going to come for an hour. And that's me saying hello and
Mm,
celebrating with you. But then after that, I'm gonna duck out. So it's around the boundary setting and that clear communication. Um, Stacey, anything else that you suggest?
No, I think I will just add and reiterate that when we do share, I just am mindful, Kat, that not everyone feels comfortable, even
Yeah.
if the loved ones are around, with the I think what I'm trying to say is when we're vulnerable, we want to put our vulnerability in a safe place.
Mm,
And so I think it's really important that when we do share our vulnerability, we want to ensure we're placing it in the hands of someone that will hold it delicately. And
mm,
sometimes I think what can happen is when we share vulnerably, we have this expectation that they will, but we kind of, if we are honest with ourselves, they might be a little bit terse, or they might have already given a bit of a comment about like, oh, well, Sarah's really excited for you to meet the baby, and you just start to notice the way people are holding themselves around you already. So just be mindful that, yeah, where you do share, you're just watching the kind of hand you're putting that very delicate piece of yourself in. And if it doesn't feel like they're going to delicately hold it, asking yourself whether you will be able to cope with that not being held the
mm,
way you need to. Because I think it's just a piece that can be shocking when we do then find the courage to share. And then on the back of that, it's like this onset disappointment with the people's responses because
mm,
people be happy. And so that is, it's hard for me to say because it's a hard reality to hear, but I think it's an important reality to take into consideration
mm,
dealing with this time.
mm. Thanks. Thanks, Stacey and Kat, for that. Um, we've got a couple more questions, and I'll come feeding them in through the session. So keep sending them through. And if we don't get to all of your questions, we hope that we're going to post those on our social media without your names, of course, just so we can answer them for you if for some reason we don't get to them. But building on that, how can partners or support people look after each other, as well as the person who experienced a miscarriage or pregnancy loss? How can they support each other? So I guess if we're talking in a partnership or if it's single by choice, that support person, how can they support each other during this time? I know we talked about the scale of the 1 to 10, which I think is a great tool. But is there anything else that kind of pops to mind?
In grief in general, this is something I always say, and that's removing expectations.
Mm.
Um, Sometimes with our grief, we expect everybody else to respond the same way that we do and to process and to want to, maybe if we're somebody that likes to talk about our emotions and our feelings um, and our baby, um, you know, the other person might not grieve that way. And so understanding that and respecting that too, and trying to find a way to meet in the middle, which could be, as Stacey said, that number scale and finding that language so that even the 30%, 70% like Brene Brown. So it's a shared language, a shared understanding, but it also allows each person to grieve in the way that they need to grieve. It can be really helpful to, learn about different grieving styles. So, there's the intuitive grieving, which is more about like outward expression, and people like to talk about it and step into their emotions. And then we also find that there's more instrumental, which is doing and practical. And of course, you can have a bit of both. But what we often find, especially in like a partnership, is that one is either or, and that can sometimes be where the conflict
Mm,
arises or the misunderstanding. So that shared language, that shared understanding, and understanding that we all grieve in different ways. You can have like an agreed plan for the day as well. So if you've got something that's coming up, like discuss it beforehand about how it may come up for you and how you might like to be supported in that moment, a time outward or a gesture that can be helpful so you don't actually have to say anything, but it gives you you feel like you're able to step away if you need to. Um,
great for group settings.
yeah, yeah.
It's
And
annoying.
if you are a support person who maybe isn't experiencing a pregnancy loss yourself, go and learn and
Mm,
educate yourself. So by being on a call like this, wonderful. We love that. We love people that are proactive in trying to find out how to support people. But there's also so many more resources on like Pink Elephant support, that you can read and learn about so that you can show up for your person
mm,
without having to place that pressure on them to ask what they need. Because sometimes when we're in the thick of it, we don't know what we need and we don't know how to ask. And quite a few people in the comments I saw said, I don't know how to ask for help.
mm,
So by being a support person, go and learn and educate through people who have the capacity to tell you how you could
mm,
help, so that you can show up for them.
mm,
Um, yeah, Stacey, anything else?
Yeah, I think that's really helpful to start from this really thought out understanding of how each other grieve. And yeah, as so said, there are many ways for this to be relevant. So for many of you, you might be moving through this process in a romantic relationship. You might be moving through this process even in a romantic relationship, and the person that you're kind of butting heads with or finding tension with is not that person. Like I do find that a lot in our group therapy program that they say, oh well, the person I'm moving through this with is not the person that I'm having the tension with. It could be a mum or a mother-in-law or a sister or friend or whatever.
mm,
And if you are moving through it on your own, same deal. Like, who is the person that you feel like you need to learn about? Maybe not necessarily the grief that they're moving through with your pregnancy loss and your baby loss, but how they dealt with grief with someone else, with a parent or a grandmother, a pet, whatever it is, so you can start to understand why they might be responding this way. And
mm,
off the back of the instrumental intuitive, which is useful to start thinking about, and you can look into this a little further, it also starts to move into some examples, or you can kind of start to imagine what that looks like in terms of the way people live. So when you move intuitive, you're talking in the way that we work in Pink Elephants. We talk about this dual process model, which intuitive can be, as Kat said, that talking and that processing, but it can also be that you're more in that very stereotypical view of grief. So there's an emotional element, the sadness, the tears, the finding it hard to leave the couch, the binging. And then on the other form, often, not always, the instrumental can look more in that restoration. So the person going to work, the person doing the comms, the person moving through life a little differently. I think it's really important to know that both of these spectrums and that we oscillate between the two. There is not one way, like all spectrums we dance, but all of it is grief. And I
mm,
think when we start to really deeply understand that, I think sometimes we can get very stuck in this is the way we grieve, and anything other than that more traditional stereotypical view of grief is a non-grief, a moving on. Whereas we know that we can feel like we can't leave the couch one day and then be desperate to go to brunch the next and then straight back to the couch that afternoon. Like we know it can exist in us, but often when we're thinking about it in someone else, it's like a different judgment. And we all know that with partners. We're like, oh, I could do this, it's fine. You do it means something completely different.
mm,
So just being really mindful of the things that Kat opened up and then those other elements of the way it can show up is all grief. It's all grief. So it just will look differently in yourself, but also potentially in
mm.
another person.
Thank you, Stacey. I think, yeah, realizing or having that acknowledgement or knowledge that grief presents itself on a continuum. And yeah, you can go and feel like you want to go to brunch one day and then come home and you crashed out for 3, 4 hours an entire day on the couch. Um, Yeah. So, building, so just going on from, we sort of touched on what happens when it's not your partner or direct support person that you're butting heads with, for want of a better term, around grief, but perhaps it's a family member. And there's a question in the comments here from Gemma that says, my in-laws keep referring to our second trimester termination for medical reasons as a miscarriage, even though we've already had three other miscarriages that they know about. I don't know how to explain to them that this isn't the reason. Sorry, I don't have to explain to them that this is the reason we're not seeing them for Christmas. If they can't acknowledge our loss properly, how can we get them to accept that rejection from us? That's that's a hard one. It's quite specific. Do you need me to read that again, or you got
No, I
that?
think, look, the first thing that comes straight to mind for me is you have a right to define the language.
Mhm.
Mm.
Okay. So there is medical language. It doesn't always serve us so well. We know this. Okay. So we know that, yeah, I'm not going to go through the very big list of terminology that can make us feel rubbish.
Mhm.
But it exists. Even if there is language that you do relate to in more of a medical demonstration, you have, I think it's very important that you find your own language so then they are able to, they can still reject it, but then it is much more, it's a very big thing for you to express your language and the language that you have defined your baby, your loss, your experience, for someone to then say, I'm going to use my own. It's like you name a baby and somebody's going to name it something else. Often that's not the case. So coming in with this and owning this experience the way you need to could be a good start. It's a big step. And it
Mm.
means that you have to then kind of go and have stock take with how this sits for you. And that's not easy. And I really do encourage that if you are moving through this and you would like to keep working on this with your parent in-laws, that, you know, some support and some professional support to find your language and to find that definition if this is not something that feels, you know, simple or it's coming easily. But I do think if you can find a way to define it with what feels right for you and then therefore have the courage to express that, that it might be some parameters that is set for you all.
Mm. Mm.
Mm.
I think it is really hard reflecting personally, but also from what I hear from women that we work with every day, and their partners as well, or support people that, you going and living through loss can be feel very, for want of a better term, real for the person experiencing the loss compared to the person who is the support person or the partner. And there's a couple of questions in the chat here that I'm kind of going to push together. I hope people don't mind that where the experience is not felt potentially as deeply as the other
Mm.
support person. So the person who is going physically through the pregnancy loss is feeling it very, very deeply, and potentially the partner is not feeling it as deeply. There's a comment here that says, I don't feel it as deeply as you and not physically going through it like you. She says, it's like he doesn't want to acknowledge our baby as just lost. Meanwhile, I'm a mess. So that is kind of a little bit maybe exemplified with the experience of Christmas and celebrations. I'm not sure, but does anyone want to speak to that? Because there's a theme coming through the chat like
Yeah,
that.
it's really difficult because, I think it's completely valid to be frustrated by it because you're wondering, well, how on earth do you not feel this loss the way I do? My world feels like it's crumbling. And with grief in general, again, I keep coming back to grief because I think it often feels that way. It feels like our world has stopped and the rest of the world continues moving. And that is a really hard
Mm,
concept to continue moving forward with. Um, I don't think there's a simple answer. There is, you can't make somebody else feel something that they don't feel.
mm,
What you can do, however, is have communicate with them about what your needs are, how I need you to support me in this moment. You may not be feeling this way. I am feeling this way.
Mm,
When you refer to our baby as XYZ, it makes me feel this way. It's not, again, it comes back to the saying like, you're not making me feel this way. I
mm,
feel this way, so it's around the language that we use and somehow finding a way of, as Stacey said, like being okay with the fact that not everybody is going to hold our loss the way that we want them to hold it, and like finding a way of becoming at peace with that. It hurts and
mm,
it's frustrating, and you can even express that frustration and say, it really it's hard for me. Um, but yeah, it's a really tricky one because you can't force somebody to feel something. So again, it comes down to the understanding that we grieve in different ways,
mm,
and people experience loss differently. And for some people, they feel it heavier than others.
mm,
But I think by acknowledging that you have that frustration, like that's a great step, like
mm.
to acknowledge, like it really pisses me off and it really upsets me and it
Yeah,
hurts me.
yeah.
Like that's huge to acknowledge it. So identifying our emotions, Stacey again mentioned that like a huge part of this is being able to identify our emotions and what it is that we're feeling in that
Mm.
moment.
And if we can't use words, using other
The
tools like the
numbers.
scale, writing
Yeah.
a letter, post-it note, I don't know, something that's going to represent how you're feeling, a squeeze on the shoulder, a look across the room, a keyword, something like that.
Because when it comes to grief, nobody's going to feel grief exactly the same
Mm,
as one another, even if you've experienced the exact same loss.
mm, mm.
And
And
it's tricky.
yeah, thank you. I'm just cognizant of time, but I'm just going to move through and talk a little bit about honoring honoring loss. How can you honor either your own loss or a friend's loss or a family member's loss? And I'm sure we've got a mixture of people on the call tonight. Um, there was also a question in the chat about how can we honor the a family member's loss during this
Mm,
time?
mm.
Any thoughts or
Um,
ideas?
yeah, it's funny because I think when we use the word ritual, there
Mm,
is a whole heap of expectation, and it might look differently when you think of the word ritual or you've got a visual of a ritual compared to me. But as a stereotype, I imagine many people think some kind of religious thing or a candle or some form of music, and it can be all of those things, and all of
mm,
those things are beautiful. But we talk about in Grief and Grace that rituals can be, what's the word we use, frequent and infrequent. So we're able to access ritual all the time without it necessarily being a sit down moment where you make that moment happen with ritual or ceremony. And it could look like walking on the beach and looking out, to the ocean and really thinking about your baby, really feeling them. That is a ritual, because at the end of the day, ritual is trying to have us connect with the baby, with at the end of at what we're looking to connect with, the felt sense. And
mm,
so, however you're able to feel and connect with your baby in this experience is a version of a ritual. So that will look differently for everybody. And if you are a person looking to honor that in someone, thinking about who they are as a person. I think sometimes we can really overcomplicate this stuff. Oh my God, I don't know what to do. I didn't have a miscarriage. And I will think about the person you love. Who are they? Do they like music? Do they
mm,
like the beach? Are they anti all of this stuff and they need something like movie tickets to have some one on one time with themselves? Think of the human, because I
mm,
think at times we really can get in our heads about doing the right thing and then find ourselves doing nothing. And at the absolute beginning, finding what ritual looks like for them, or if you're here on behalf of yourself, and
mhm.
what makes you feel and what would be something to have you connect,
Yeah.
is I think a good place to start.
And I think I'm reflecting on my experiences. Um, if you're someone in the room who has not had the loss, who you're supporting someone, um, if you are gentle and ask them, simply asking the question sometimes, I'm so sorry for your loss. Can I do anything? Just having that question. I don't think actually anyone ever really asked me that question. Um, that could be all that they need. It's just sometimes people don't want anything. Um,
It's an acknowledgement. It comes back to everything we do at Pink Elephant, the acknowledgement.
the acknowledgement.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So, and I think if you do have, because can everybody see each other in the chat as well? If you do have a
Mm,
reason
they
you would
can.
like to
Yeah.
share, sometimes it is nice. I know in the group work I do, it is really nice to hear each other's because it can sometimes connect you, or you might have something like a beautiful suggestion I've just read is a bauble with the baby's name
Hmm.
on it, or even just, we have at our house, we have little ornaments and we just write what was kind of a profound moment of that year. And so you might not have named your baby, but it might be, baby bub, October 20, whatever. It doesn't have to be anything.
Mm.
It doesn't have to look a certain way. But
Mm.
yeah, it might be nice for people to read each other's if you are.
Yeah, there's some beautiful suggestions
Can
there.
I share like a left field one that I have, just as an example of how they don't have to be what we may imagine them to be? And it's often these micro moments of just remembering. So
Mm.
for me, with one of our pregnancies, I was very sick every time my husband made me mashed potato. It made me very, very sick. And this is one of the few things I remember about this pregnancy. And now, every time I have mashed potato, I think of that baby we lost. And it
No.
seems so,
Oh, it's
you
beautiful.
know, out there, and it doesn't sound like a typical ritual, but it's a moment for me to pause and remember that maybe isn't even obvious to anybody around me
Mm.
that it's happening, but it's a small micro moment to me. So when we talk about rituals again, it could be something as like silly as that.
Well,
Um,
and Kat, get back to the point though, it's so you, like
yeah.
getting to know you through this process, that,
Mm.
that kind of silly, charming, like loving kind of, that is you, so
Mm.
it is coming back to who are you and how, what feels good and best for you
Yeah.
in creating something like that. That's so,
Yeah.
I love
Great.
it.
Thank you
And
so
now I'm
much.
going to think of mashed potato. Now I am.
Yeah.
And that's going
Everyone
to
can think
keep
of me when they
going
eat mashed
light. Well,
Yeah.
potato.
I love it.
Yeah.
Oh,
Um, okay, we're almost at an hour, but I just want to finish off. I feel like the three of us could talk about this for half a day. And it sounds like, those of you who are on the call, uh, could talk with us for as long as well. So, I just want to, kind of end the session moving into what kind of self-care practices or grounding techniques do you find most helpful for people sort of during this time, or at any time during the year, but even more so during a time where people are on their own schedules and things are a bit chaotic and emotions are running high, um, or overwhelming. So what are some of the self-care practices that we could remind each other of, um, that the group might want to take away with themselves tonight?
yeah, I think breath is important. I think at the end of the day, what can happen at this time, but with grief is, and in life, we get into our heads. And also, what can happen when we've had a loss, which has, really big repercussions physically, is that our body can
Mm.
start to feel a little disconnected. And breath can sometimes be a lot. So I'm going to be just, put that there that you need to kind of tend to this really gently. But you don't have to go anywhere. It can be accessed everywhere. You are given it as a gift. We literally breathe every day and we are delivered it without having to do anything. It is the one thing we can take and receive with no guilt, and we can just thank that we can just inhale and exhale. And it sounds a little bit grandiose and, but it really does come back to this simple access to a gift that we're given to take the breath in. And then what happens is we continue to do little micro moments to come back to our body. because without the connection with our body, it's very hard to identify feelings. And we have already discussed that without identifying feelings, a lot of this is very hard to do. So
Mm,
I would start with the breath, and then anything that gets you into your body that might be different to that is also something to consider, because that body connection can be, yeah, it can be tough with
mm,
this experience. So easy and gently. And I would recommend the breath is where you can start. Very
mm,
subtle. It's in the
I
car.
I also think, it's not about choosing, about, it's not about having to have both and or either or, like you said, it's not black and white. One strategy that we can have is just knowing that
Yeah.
it's, either, like it can be both, it can be all,
mm,
and honoring that in you too. So, perhaps it is that you felt really happy when you went to a Christmas dinner because the food was yummy. But then there was also a sadness sitting on your chest because you had expected to be there with somebody, or with a pregnant belly, or whatever it may be for you.
mm,
So it's that mindset around, that we can have multiple emotions. Um, and Stacey, you mentioned it at the start of like naming our feelings, like understanding our emotions. Like so often we just have this like five words that we use to explain our emotions, but so much more complex than that. There's such big spectrum, right? So if we can name our feelings, research shows that that can help with our regulation and our self-care too. Um, the micro moments, Stacey, like mentioned the micro moments. We've mentioned them all through here. There's micro moments in different ways, but micro moments of intentional rest. Take 5 minutes to have a cup of tea, like watch the kettle boil. That's the British coming out in me with the cups of tea, but watch the kettle boil, watch the bubbles. That in itself is such a mindful way to get back into your senses.
Yeah,
mm,
I also like when you drive at the lights, trying to just spot which trees are moving.
Yeah.
Which is, I always imagine it like they're waving to me because I'm like a little girl walking around in a big woman's body. But there's an enchanting aspect to this,
mm,
and often when we are trying to connect, there's a magic or a spirit that we might be looking also to connect with, or that we might be missing. So this it's kind of there's a magical aspect to the trees, and it
mm.
then also allows you to move out of whatever is happening in the world, staying present, like you say.
Yeah.
Thank you, Stacey and Katrina. We're going to finish with a very brief little meditation breath exercise. But before we do that, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. So we're going to close out after the meditation ends because I don't want you to have to keep talking, and we don't want to keep talking at you once you've done that. So then go and do something nice and quiet for yourselves and your support people, um, or you as a support person. So we are here, Pink Elephants are here. We have our peer support services. This is the first time we've run one of these webinars. So in a couple of days' time, you might get a little follow-up email just to ask for some feedback. We have got our live chat service, which operates after hours during the week. And we also have our pregnancy loss support helpline, which you can access through the numbers on our website, as is live chat. And we also have our Grief and Grace groups, which is a 6-week course run by Stacey. And we would love for you to register for that next year. Registrations aren't open yet, but you can also join others on our online Facebook community groups as well. And then you've got grief talks with some further grief resources of Katrina's that you can find. And we also have Panda, the perinatal support helpline as well. Of course, there's Lifeline, and I really just want to finish off before Stacey takes us into a meditation to say thank you for joining us. Your feelings are valid, your boundaries are allowed, and you can choose what the holiday season looks like for you. So I'm just going to hand over to Stacey now, and then we'll close
Can
out
you
the
just
session.
share quickly where they'll find the recording? A few people have just asked.
Oh, yes, we will post that on our socials and on our website. So Stacey, over to you.
Okay, thanks, ladies. So this is going to be about 5 minutes, and I encourage you to start to move into a spot that can hold you. So that will look like a seat, it might look like the floor, it might look like your bed, a couch, just something that gives you the ability to lean back. And I'm going to invite you, where you feel safe to do so, to close down your eyes. You can flutter them a few times like a little butterfly. Give yourself a chance to just move into this posture or this space slowly. You can dim the lights, you can go get a blanket. I'll give you just a few moments to prepare. And I think also if there's a way for you to unravel, so if you've got your legs crossed, can you uncross them if it feels okay to do so? If your hands are clenched, let them go. And then again, if you haven't already, starting to close down the eyes. And noticing the breath as it is in this moment, moving into that internal world. And just letting some of the ideas and maybe what you've consumed, the mind might be starting to come up with an action plan or something to do straight after. And I just invite you to give yourself the extra few moments to be here with us, but more importantly, to be with yourself. So you might start to deepen your breath now. Through the nose, you might like to open the mouth and let out a sigh. You might do that a couple more times, otherwise closing the mouth and just letting the breath meet you at the nostrils, receiving that breath, filling up your insides, your belly, and then very slowly letting it return. And so as you inhale, I want you to have some form of visual here with the breath coming in through the nose. It might look like a little firework or a soft visual version of wind energy of some form. And as it enters through the nose, I want you to see if you can find softness in the body where it might be needed. So perhaps the jaw, the back, the feet, and that beautiful energy that you're receiving through the nose delivers on the exhale to the area of the body that may need that extra support. And when I say support, I mean softening. Not structure, not protection. And now leaning back into your support, letting the breath come back to its natural rhythm. You're going to start to lean back into your chair or into the bed. And as you exhale, just see if you can very slowly start to allow yourself to be held. You might start to relax the shoulders, get a little heavier in the upper body. Start to feel your sit bones ground into your chair or the spine into the floor or the bed. And from that place, start to imagine this invisible, or this imaginary, I should say, canopy under you. Canopy can be anything, could be like a hammock, could be energetic light, but it's holding you, holding your entire body, allowing yourself to completely surrender into this holding. As you exhale, continuing to get a little heavier and receiving this gesture of being held. And this canopy or this hammock holding you and holding whatever's coming up about your baby. Maybe holding pain, hope, anxiety, disappointment. Letting it all be held now. And as you take 3 deep breaths, every exhale will have you surrender and lean a little further into this support that you've created for yourself in this moment. The support that you have access to anytime you need. Taking a breath in through the nose, opening the mouth and letting go one more time. And you might stay exactly as you are, keeping the eyes closed and staying in this supportive holding that you've created and carved for yourself. Not just in this meditation, but in the last hour, by showing up, by finding ways to support yourself in this way is admirable. So continue to receive this if it feels useful to you. If not, you might slowly start to move the body. But we will leave you here for this evening. And we will give you the space to move into your evening how you feel is right for you. And we thank you so much for showing up for yourself. We're deeply sorry for your loss. Good night, everybody.
Good night.